Hello, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond. My name is Taylor, and welcome to the world of Lordran, a world filled with heinous creatures beyond comprehension, betrayal, and camaraderie. A world that massively expanded an entire subgenre of gaming, now known as the Souls-like. In the Soul-searching series, I aim to understand two things: what the developers of the game had intended when they made the game using different elements on game design and interview notes, and what I learned or how I changed as a result of the game in question. Searching not only for the soul of the game, but also my own soul. Welcome to Soul Searching Episode 1, Dark Souls 1. Now, the original Dark Souls was released in 2011 as a sequel/soft reboot of the game Demon's Souls from 2009. The game was re-released in 2017 as a remaster with a lot fewer bugs and way better textures. This is the version of the game that we'll be looking at today, developed by From Software and published by Bandai Namco. The most recognizable name associated with the game is Hidetaka Miyazaki, who has since become the head of From Software. Now, before we get into the development of the game itself and the aims that they had going into it, I want to talk about my experience with the games in terms of what I knew about them, what I played of them, and just everything that I learned, and then compare that with what the developers had intended, whether or not I believe they achieved their goals, and kind of did I learn the things that they wanted me to take away from the game. With that being said, let's get into my experiences. So my first real exposure to the game was around 2011 when it first released, but not actually as a player. Now, I have a family member who's actually a pretty prolific speedrunner, who has done numerous runs in Dark Souls. I don't believe any in Demon's Souls, but does a lot of Neo runs lately. Anyway, it was during these times that I was with him while he was streaming on Twitch and watched what I thought was such an, quote, ugly game and being really confused as he tried for a Black Knight Halberd. I also distinctly remember standing inside Blockbuster, God, I'm old, looking at the game cover and being really confused. It had a seemingly generic name, and the cover art did nothing for my 13-year-old brain to say, hey, this looks super cool. I also want to point out that the Japanese release had a much more interesting cover image, though it wouldn't have appealed to me as a younger teenager anyway. It is a lot more visually interesting and much easier to read, especially looking at it nowadays. I'll have both of those up on screen, and I don't know what happened in terms of why the West got such a different visual. I did read in an interview note that I believe it was Miyazaki who told like a Western artist, like, you want to feel the demons and darkness coming from your soul. And I don't know if I agree with the artist's interpretation, but I'm just some dude who sits in his living room and makes YouTube videos, so what do I know? But yeah, it was just a really weird choice, artistically speaking, and did not do anything for me, or I'm sure for many, just based on cover art. And I know, don't judge a book or a game by its cover, but I was 13 and dumb. Now, I'm no longer 13, but I'm still dumb. Anyway, I remember looking at the back of the game too, and some of the screenshots were so dark I couldn't tell what they were. Now, this was before visiting my family member and seeing the game being played itself, but I genuinely didn't connect the name of the game that he was playing with the one from Blockbuster and just went about my life. While I was there, I did try out the game, and I was really confused. I just kind of put it down. I was like, yeah, you know what, it's not for me. It was interesting enough watching him play, but there was no desire in me that I had to get this game, that I had to play it, and I kind of forgot about it whenever I wasn't watching him play. So this was technically the first in the series that I had played. I never finished the game until years later, and it was not the first one that I finished. It was actually the second. I'm sure I'll tell this story a few times over, but it was actually John and Chris, two of my closest friends, who got me into the series when we played the third entry together. The playlists of which are on John's channel, Noiseberry Games, which is linked in the description down below. Now, we started with Dark Souls 3, but that's a story for another video. After the third entry, we decided to play number 1. Since then, I have done one solo playthrough in the remaster, and we did one more group playthrough in the remaster. I also did a playthrough with just John and I to get all achievements, which was a task in and of itself. So in total, I have beaten the game 4 times and have just over 60 hours collectively. Funnily enough, I would say, even though I have more hours in number 3, number 1 is definitely one of my favorite Souls games, mostly because of the bosses like Artorias and ONS, which have always been memorable standout fights to me, and of course I can't forget Sif, my poor puppers. Now, I will be breaking down each playthrough and what, if anything, I learned from those experiences, while also discussing the developers' goals as they develop the game to see if they match and come together. Pretty much unsurprisingly, I think I learned most from my first playthrough, that I ever did with the boys. My first playthrough taught me a lot about how buggy the PC port was, and just how much I had grown as a gamer. And yes, that is a sentence I just came out of my face hole. Because when I played Dark Souls 3, it was a lot smoother of an experience, and one of the reasons I bounced off Dark Souls 1 the first time was the clunky controls. I feel like this was, for lack of a better term, and because of the over-association, I got good. It clicked for me. I was finally able to enjoy the game, the way that so many other people could. The openness of the combat and gameplay expressed itself to some small degree that I actually understood. Now, a lot of this was due to my experience with number 3. Still, I can certainly feel the differences between the games, which is funny because they are technically built in the same engine now with the remaster, but the improvements and the experience that they developed over the course of the previous games, with the help of the guys, I was able to push through and come to terms with the different methods I'm able to use, because it's honestly surprisingly really diverse and has a lot more variety than some of the other games, excluding Elden Ring. Even number 3, I remember just like burning through 3 with just the starting straight sword and a shield, but with 1, I was forced to change the way I played. I couldn't just use the basic weapons to carry me through unless I was a mage, which we'll talk about later. So the first official full playthrough that I did was with Chris and John in July of 2017. This will naturally be linked in the description down below. And the first thing that I noticed when we tried to play together, because we had to use a mod to be able to summon one another, given this was before Remastered had released, is the character limit in terms of name. Not in the game, but on my Steam account. Because I remember us trying to summon, we couldn't figure out why the mod wouldn't let us play, and then John discovered that it's because my Steam name had more than 16 characters. And I was like, are you kidding me? It was the most ridiculous thing. For some reason, that meant whenever he tried to summon me, his game would crash, and it just wouldn't work. So once we figured it out, we were able to play. But yeah, it was just really, really annoying. Unfortunately, it was also my first experience with the annoying kind of hacker. Nothing like what we will experience in Dark Souls 3, but that's again a couple months out. This guy, of course, was in the starting area, using invincibility hacks, using movement hacks, using backstab hacks. You know, just real fun time, real good sport about the game. But outside of that, I played with the classic sword and board type character. I was still in the mindset of Dark Souls 3, and I wasn't ready to start a Limp Bizkit song. Now, for some of you, you'll understand if you're, ancient like I am. For those of you who don't understand, don't worry about it. Looking back at all the playthroughs in anticipation of kind of recording this video, I did forget, but I remember learning at the time just how to be dependent on my teammates, because Dark Souls 1, for some reason, had a mechanic where if you had summoned in 2 people, they couldn't use their own healing. They couldn't use their own Estus Flask. You had to heal for them, meaning that when you drank, it would heal them, meaning that I had to rely on John or Chris, or they had to rely on me to heal the entire party. So we really had to keep an eye on each other's health bar and communicate well. And I think it helped us a lot in terms of kind of getting used to each other, and our different gameplay styles and all that. It didn't hurt that John was using magic, which kind of lets you breeze through the entire game. But we'll talk about that more in the second playthrough. Now, watching the series back, there are a lot of quality of life changes that the remaster made that I'd completely forgotten about, because I think I just blocked them out of my mind due to trauma. And I realized that if I tried to play this version now, I would have given up. I played games to have fun, and this does not strike me as being fun without my friends. Seeing my terrible damage versus Chris's or John's mastery of the arcane made me feel so inferior. Even Chris was using miracles and lightning, which again, do massive damage. Like, it was not set up for a melee-based character, and I kind of realized that all too late. This is something that will become a bit of a trend. I don't really like most of the traditional Dark Souls games when playing them solo. I only like it when I'm playing with friends. Now, funny enough, that actually doesn't apply to some other Souls-likes, which I think were better designed for single player or had a less punishing experience for me at the very least. So we'll get to those when we get to them. Now, I understand that takes something away from the core experience. It's my time and I want to have fun. So at the end of the day, who really cares? I'm not hurting anybody. In fact, I'm helping them. And I get to play the way that I want to. My friends are really what kept me going through this game, and where a lot of the fun lied for me, especially in the beginning. I will also give the obligatory cop-out answer of, it's the way of the Guardians of Sunlight to band together and fight the forces of darkness. Praise the sun! Praise jolly cooperation. Speaking of, I did my role as a tank quite well and took most of the boss aggro so they could throw around all the magic they wanted to. I'm also reminded of the obscurity of some of the mechanics had and how frustrating they could be. I learned just how fun playing with other people can be. At that point, whenever I played with someone else, it was couch co-op of older games like Ghost Recon Future Soldier, Gears of War 2, or Army of 2, which are all fantastic games. The last two being absolute classics. So I didn't have a lot of experience playing with friends and not having them there beside me. Like, even I would go over to other friends' houses and play games with them, but I was still in the same room. And I know this was nothing new, but I realized just how much more fun matters than all the small bugs or frustrations. Honestly, as I write the script, I realize I've taken them for granted lately, and given up on some games that we did seemingly have fun with. Because of those lesser frustrations, I let them get in the way of enjoying fun with friends. So I'm sorry, boys, I really shouldn't have done that. And I will do better, and I've been trying to be better, about being more willing to engage with games, even if they have their flaws. Because I treasure my time, and it means a lot to me. I also did transition to much heavier armor and a two-handed sword for damage, because my previous build was not cutting it, pun intended, in those regards. The stone armor, or even the Elite Knight set, just did a lot more for damage absorption, and I realized I went way more feral in this playthrough. Like, I had to go heavy armor, big sword, and just really get in there, because there was no other way I could play. And I understand it's kind of ironic, I was praising the game for its flexibility and its, variety, but then I'm saying there was no other way for me to play. At the time, there was no other way that I could see myself enjoying this game. But that is, again, something I kind of realized later on, hey, there's a lot more that I can do, and we will absolutely explore that in this next part. So the second run that I did in the game, and technically the first one of the remaster, was the 3 Magi run I did with the guys, because as the name implies, we all did a different kind of magic. Now, we originally started this in October of 2018, or a little before that, because October is when the video released, so I imagine we started in either August or September, so pretty much almost bang on a year after the first series had released. I was, of course, the Fiery Pyromancer, while John played the traditional Father Chad, our resident healer and spiritualist, and Chris went with the traditional mage archetype. Now, this is my first time really dabbling in any sort of casting class in the games. I chose a Pyromancer mostly because it didn't have the same amount of stat requirements or scaling, and had a relatively straightforward collection of spells for me to use. Because it was my first time as a caster, it was a lot for me to take in and come to terms with, especially when I realized fire does almost nothing to most bosses. I couldn't be as aggressive as I wanted to be, and forced me to learn a much more strategic style of play. I do want to stress this is not in relation to my gaming as a whole, but to this series specifically. My cast times were significantly longer than my swing times from the first run, and this would slip my mind occasionally when I got way too close without thinking. This was also exacerbated by the fact that both Chris and John were also playing mages. There was no one who could properly take melee aggro and live the damage. I was actually the one with the worst range out of the 3 of us, and this placed me in an awkward position of having to throw spells the same as the other 2, but from a much shorter distance, and often meant I was either attacked first, or the boss was out of spell range, and I was too close. And I was close to useless in some of the late game areas, which were focused around demons. Because, as we all know, demons wield fire like a toy, and are therefore relatively immune to it. I will say it helped me to understand just how useful melee was, and how much damage the different casting types actually could do. Now, funny enough, all of us had to use a melee type, like John went with the Uchi-Katana, I can't remember what Chris went with, and then I went with Quelaag's Flame Sword to kind of keep on brand with my damage type, because you just could not feasibly get through the game by purely casting. And even then, my melee damage which was garbage still in comparison to Chris or John's damage. Like, there was just no winning for me, and I did not pick good classes in either run that we put on YouTube. I always knew the magic was overpowered in the first game because everyone and their long-deceased grandmother had told me, Ouija board and all. Plus, I'd seen John use it in the previous game. This did not prepare me for the ludicrous numbers that he was about to pull with his spells, and Chris with the same magic that John had used. And you guessed it, fire doesn't do that much, especially when you get to the aforementioned demons, and even some of the last bosses. They either moved way too fast to be hit, or the damage I was doing wasn't worth risking my neck and other associated body parts to be in their attack range. So I got what I would describe as a muted magic experience, but there were plenty of times where the damage I was outputting was certainly higher than the melee weapons I'd used in the first run, and there were still a few extra steps away from the bosses or other enemies. To go along with this, I usually had light armor so I could do the ninja roll, like the backflippy roll thing, because there was just no way I could justify a heavier armor or else I was going to die. It really made me appreciate my old playstyles, honestly. Having to think more tactically about position and especially stamina management, as the game doesn't have a dedicated mana bar, was a much greater challenge than I had originally anticipated. I learned to position myself a lot better, and there are times when I don't have the perfect shot lined up. I would have to think quickly and figure out what the proper free aim angle was. It really encouraged me to change the way I play. I will admit, after having done so many runs before this one in the previous Souls games, I was much more open to experimentation and trying new things. Over time, I gradually devolved more and more into a goblin. And I will say the primary lesson that I learned from this playthrough was to be more flexible in my approach, and to better appreciate my position and tactical awareness, or lack thereof. Also, please don't go back and watch these series. As I'm doing so for the script, I realized just how cringe I was, and I wanted to rip my ears off. So, if you want to watch a series that we've done, watch Elden Ring, watch Stardew. Just don't go back to those early series, please. I am literally begging you. That being said, I of course will link in the description down below because I want John to get the views, so I will suffer for that. Now, I do remember doing a solo run of the game once in Remaster, but I don't remember when or what builds I played, though I'm pretty sure it was a melee playthrough. I do remember that I ran through the game a lot faster, and that my lack of experience really hindered me. I had not perfected the parry, and this caused me a lot of trouble, especially during the Gwyn fight, because I kept getting absolutely bodied. I know everyone's like, oh, Gwyn's so easy, just parry him and slash him and he's done. Like, I couldn't get it, because I hadn't had to rely that much on my own skills up to this point. Like, this was a wake-up call for me, like, okay, I'm not actually that good. I've been, riding the bus of Chris and John this whole time, which I kind of always knew, but this was like oh man, I didn't realize it was this bad. So it forced me to get even better, especially when there was no one else to take the additional boss aggro there. Like, it was just me. I had to figure it out or I was going to keep dying. And I soon realized how little fun I was having because I had basically been playing the game on easy mode the whole time, and when faced with the actual difficulty, I started to crumble. I was able to push through after a fair bit of time, and I did get there in the end, and I don't regret it. I do think it was a good learning experience for me, but it wasn't a fun one. It wasn't one that I actually enjoyed, which, yes, I came out maybe a little bit, more perseverant when it comes to video games, but I don't think it had the same applications to real life as, some people are like, oh, Dark Souls helped me change my whole life. I got good in the game, so I got good in real life. That's not how it works. You have to choose to take the things you learned in the video game and apply them to your real life, which is a lot harder than it seems. But I will say, I definitely improved when it came to just sticking with the game, even if it was hard. Just push through it. You can do it as long as you keep banging your head against that wall. The thing that stops me nowadays is, am I having fun? If I'm not, I'm not risking that. It's not worth the price I'm paying if I'm not having fun. Now, the double A run, or all achievements run as I will be calling it, was done sometime in late 2021 because John and I had just finished shortly before the servers went down for almost a year. Now, I've spoken at length about this journey we went on together and what it meant for me on the podcast, The Overachievers, which will be linked in the description down below. Please go check it out. So I will keep this one shorter than some of the others. This one taught me a lot more about what I had not seen in the previous ones because we had intentionally avoided it. Some of them were a massive pain in the ass. This was one of the most liberating playthroughs for me because it was the one where I felt I had the most freedom to explore with different things and not be punished or punish someone else by doing so. John and I had used many soul duplication glitches to get a bunch of souls and a bunch of levels so that we didn't have to suffer in the early game. This also allowed us to both experiment with a bunch of different things and finally truly embrace fashion souls. I will have footage on screen of me killing random things, but I settled on the paladin's shield and armor with a greatsword, and both require a lot of stats to wield properly. It also meant I could go hard on the stamina front. It felt weird to default more to a sword and board tank style of play, but the game didn't punish me for it, and John was using magic to make up for my lack of range. I learned with this one just how much freedom there was in the game that technically wasn't accessible until either late game or New Game Plus, and that kind of makes me sad because it was a lot of fun. I learned just how much creativity and fun there is, not only experimenting but also pushing the game beyond its limits, in many cases to see how and where it would break. I learned how my last time playing the game would feel. Now, I've talked about this before, but for me, the all achievements run is like the way I say goodbye. The final chapter in this book for me. Like that is, I have done everything I wanted to do, and then some, and I can feel comfortable putting down the game potentially forever. So this is, as of recording, the last playthrough I've ever done of the game. You know, within this video, or within the time that it took me to record and publish the video, I don't foresee myself playing it anytime, really. I had my fun with the game. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot in terms of how to persevere, in terms of kind of what fun means to me, and what I'm willing to put myself through if I'm not having fun. You know, where my limits are, and just how much of a altered experience I have with certain things, depending on the context of which I tackle them from. You know, my entire view of the game was altered when I tried playing solo versus with the guys, and just kind of that idea that I love this game being so firmly attached to the idea of me playing with them, not playing on my own. And both of them have thousands upon thousands of hours. Okay, maybe not thousands upon thousands, but they have like close to 1,000 hours in the series. I have maybe half of that. And so many of their playthroughs are solo, especially John. Like, Chris has a Dark Souls tattoo, which I think is awesome. But I realized more than anything that my love for the game, my love for the series, was tied to them, not to the experience itself necessarily. Now, with that being said, I've searched my soul. Let's take a small glimpse into the soul of the developers and see what they were trying to truly make, and just how much of that vision came to life. So I'm still workshopping how I want this section to play out exactly, but here's my first attempt. Miyazaki and the entire FromSoft team who worked on Dark Souls clearly wanted to make a Demon's Souls sequel, a Demon's Souls successor. However, Sony owns the intellectual property to Demon's Souls, hence why it is a PS3 exclusive and why the remake is a PS5 exclusive. Hopefully that changes in the future. Please put it on PC. Anyway, thus they were unable to make a sequel, or rather a direct sequel, to Demon's Souls. And they settled on a more spiritual successor using publisher Bandai Namco. Now, you can really see, you know, kind of the same game design carry through from Demon's Souls into Dark Souls, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. What I want to know today is, what did the developers have in mind? Why did they do it this way? Did they achieve that final goal? Now, the reason I bring up the fact they wanted a sequel is because it definitely inspired a lot of what Dark Souls became, but as Miyazaki put it, and I will leave links for all of my research down below, it'll be a number of YouTube videos, interviews, things like that with Miyazaki and other members of the development team. It meant that they had a relative idea for the feel they wanted to go for, but they weren't constrained by things related to Demon's Souls. They weren't constrained by the world they'd already created and could make something entirely new. Now, from an artist perspective, this was really interesting because with some things, Miyazaki had a clear vision in mind. He told them, okay, this is what I want you to do. He gave the artist what he described as image words or kind of image phrases. For example, make something that you could trust with your life. Make an enchantment that you feel would protect you. And then he kind of let the artist take these image words, take these image phrases, and run with them. Take them in the direction that the artist felt was appropriate, and then Miyazaki would either okay it or ask for changes from that point on, again, on the things he wasn't 100% sure about. Now, they knew they wanted this dark fantasy concept, and they apparently focused on 3 different themes, which you can definitely see throughout the game, but I don't know if it's as clear as they wanted it to be. Now, those 3 themes were images of gods and knights, which definitely centers around Anor Londo, Lost Izalith and the themes of chaos, fire, and demons. Finally, Gravelord Nito and the image of death and decay. Now, I want to examine each of these 3 elements individually and kind of where I fell into these themes, or if I fell into them at all. So let's start with Anor Londo, the knights, the gods. When we see knights, when we see gods represented in the Souls series, especially with Dark Souls 1, we think of heavy armor, we think of dragons, we think of miracles, because those are the 3 things that are most heavily related to the gods, or to the knights in this game. The Black Knights, for example, were burned by dragon fire, and they keep that black armor as a reminder of the horrible war they had against the dragons and their eventual defeat. Lightning was used by Gwyn. Miracles were used to take down the dragons in their war. Even the Silver Knights are some of the most iconic enemies in the entire game and pose some of the most trouble, especially in Anor Londo with those stupid rooftop sections near the church. But the player also fits into the archetype or the theming of a knight. A lot of the classes, knight excluded, have heavier armor, have the more traditional knight-like armor that you would see. They have a weapon and a shield, which are commonly associated with knights, or they're going for a knight's weapon. Even Solaire, the head of the Warriors of Sunlight, is a knight. He is dressed as a more traditional knight with a bit of imagery, kind of made for their own world, but that's fine. He's still a knight. Even my first character was a knight archetype. It was heavy armor, sword, shield, then moved over to heavier armor and a two-handed sword, which was actually how, historically, knights did progress. They moved into two-handed weapons. We'll get into that later. So I fell into this first version. Chris fell into this first version in his use of miracles. Was he praising the gods? Was he praising Gwyn every time he used them? No, but he was following in the steps that Dark Souls laid out. So I definitely think they hit this theme right on the head. Now, Lost Izalith, themes of chaos, fire, and demons. This one is definitely a lot more obscure than some of the others, because as you know, Dark Souls lore is very obscure in general, but I think the demons and the fire and chaos are a little more obscure, especially if you don't look at item descriptions and things like that. Now, this video is not meant to look into the lore of different things. It's kind of very surface level, very, at a glance, did they achieve this? Now, I think the whole area around, the Bed of Chaos, Lost Izalith, all of that, Ceaseless Discharge is absolutely chaotic, and not always intentionally chaotic. Like, it had a lot of bugs, it had a lot of problems, especially in the first version, but they definitely hit that theme of chaos. They hit that theme of fire. The problem comes in with the demons, because yes, we see enemies that have demons in the name. We have Taurus demons, we have Capra demons, we have, I don't actually know what other demons technically that have demon in their name, but the problem comes with the enemy design. Now, none of them fit the traditional word demon, or at least how a Westerner might look at it, because when you look at, Japanese folklore, a demon, an oni, a yokai, yes, I know those are all technically different things, but from a surface level perspective, are all relatively similar, and yet they're so diverse. They look so different. Okay, maybe not yokai, yokai is more ghosts, but anyway, again, these creatures look so different, so there's nothing to really fit into one word, fit into one title of demon. I think if they wanted to associate demon with fire, sure, they nailed it, but the problem is, not every enemy in that section uses fire. The mosquitoes don't use fire. Some of the undead don't use fire. The Taurus demon doesn't use fire. The Capra demon doesn't use fire. The Centipede demon does. The Bed of Chaos doesn't really, which is kind of weird because it was the progenitor of all pyromancies. The weird vacuum cleaner thing doesn't use fire. But for some reason, small dogs use fire, and roly-poly stone statues use fire. Like, what the hell? So it's just a really inconsistent theming around what enemies do and don't use fire, especially in Lost Izalith, and what could actually be considered a demon from a surface level perspective. Because again, we could go into the lore all day long, and there's thousands of videos from thousands of different channels that do an excellent job of. That's not what I'm here for. I want to know, did they hit this? And I think, unfortunately, with Lost Izalith, they kind of dropped the ball, so to speak. Now, where do I come in with fire? Well, my second character was a pyromancer, and I never felt super powerful. I never felt like I was channeling the power of demons when I was using pyromancies. I'm just like, oh, here's a big fireball. Oh, it did no damage. Well, crap. So, I don't know, fire to me felt like it could have been more heavily utilized, that it should have had more of mechanical differences in terms of like enemies that were maybe weak to fire because they were weaker to the demon's influence or things like that. It felt very underutilized in comparison to, knights, gods, and even death when we get there, in terms of its actual gameplay mechanics. And I think this was the one that kind of hurt them. This is the one where they kind of fell off a little. Finally, we get to the theme of death and decay. Now, I mean, death is present throughout the entire game. Naturally, you're going to die many, many times. You're going to kill things many, many times. And we don't really see the theme of decay until we get kind of into later parts of the game, where you see things like New Londo. You see areas closer to Nito's boss room where things have started to decay, the Tomb of Giants, and other places that are falling apart, that are slowly falling into disrepair. Even something like Firelink Shrine, like you see it not in its full glory. You see it after decades or centuries have passed, and it's started to crumble. The entire game really does a good job of kind of embodying this whole theme of the world is crumbling, the world is decaying, and you have to decide. Do you continue this dying, decaying mess, or do you put a stop to it once and for all? Do you decide enough is enough, it needs to be put down, it needs to rest? Which brings us into kind of the last two elements of the design that I wanted to talk about. Now, Miyazaki really wanted to focus on cycles of rebirth and futility in this game, as in with every other Dark Souls game, but we'll get there. So, naturally, at the end of the game, you have a choice. Do you light the bonfire? Do you create a new Age of Fire? Or do you usher in the Age of Dark? Do you continue the cycle, like a hamster on a wheel? Or do you throw the wheel aside? Do you say, I am not your puppet, I will not follow your command, I will do as I wish? Now, I'm not going to say one is right or wrong, it's totally up to you to decide what you feel is best. But I do think they hit this idea of a cycle really well in terms of the introduction movie cinematic and the choices you make at the end of the game as the player. Not to mention, the gameplay beautifully integrates the idea of a cycle. You die, you wake up at a bonfire, you repeat. You die, you wake up at a bonfire, you repeat. Again, again, and again. And yes, each cycle is slightly different. Maybe you die to a different enemy, or you level up a certain skill so you can use a new spell or a new weapon, and you get past that enemy. You get so much farther than you could before, and then you die again. But then you wake up at a bonfire, and you repeat the cycle again and again and again. So I definitely think he hit this theme really well in terms of both the visuals, the storytelling, and the mechanics. And the final thing I wanted to talk about is arguably the thing that is most associated with Dark Souls games. It's difficulty, or as Miyazaki likes to put it, it's challenge. Because he didn't want to make a difficult game. He wanted to make a challenging game so that when you finally overcame that challenge, when you finally decided, I can do this, and then you achieved it, you would feel such a strong sense of, dare I say, pride and accomplishment, looking at you, EA, that you could actually feel joy for what you have done, for what you have accomplished, because you overcame everything the game has thrown at you. He didn't want to make a difficult game. He wanted to make a challenging game. He wanted to challenge you, the player, to improve your skills, to come back time and time again, follow that cycle until you achieved your goal. He did not want you to give up, because it was not meant to be difficult, it was meant to be challenging. And yes, I'm sure you're sick of that word by now, but I'll keep going. And honestly, I think he nailed it. I have spoken at length in this video, in other videos, that I don't play Souls games solo very often. I don't like it because I find it very, very challenging, but also I don't find it fun. Now, I have played this game solo, only once, but I got through it. And I think I came out as a stronger person, as a stronger gamer in this case. Now, did I have fun? A bit. I do think it's a well-designed game in many respects, but there are just some things that I can't really enjoy as much because I started out with that multiplayer perspective, and I know what the other side of that fence looks like. They say the grass is always greener on the other side. I started out on that side, and I came back over to see what this was like. I was like, nope, I'm going back. But I still feel like I grew as a person to meet and overcome that challenge. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what his primary philosophy was. Create this challenge so that players can overcome it. He even said in another interview that he doesn't design the game for the story. He designs the story to fit into the game. He designs the game first and the story afterwards. Meaning he started out with this idea of have the player be challenged, have them overcome that challenge gradually. Even with things like the Estus Flask, bonfires, jolly cooperation, summoning in friends, are all meant to help you overcome that challenge. You don't have to overcome it alone. You don't have to do it a specific way with a specific build. That is the freedom, that is the joy that he brought to this game. He created a system where we, as the fans, created an entire sprawling community where we could band together and take on this challenge as we felt appropriate. Just look at all the speedruns, challenge runs, everything like that this game has spawned, because it says, overcome this challenge your way, whatever way you feel is best. And I think that's beautiful. I think that is the perfect way to design a game. And I don't think this game is perfect, but it's damn close. So, as you couldn't already tell, I absolutely do believe that he was able to meet and accomplish this goal of creating a challenging but rewarding game. Now, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, the fire has started to fade, the embers are starting to burn out, and darkness encroaches. So, as we wrap up this video, thank you once again for being here, for watching, for listening. If you have any thoughts as to how it might improve this series in the future, please leave them in the comments down below. This is an entirely new concept I want to try out. I am hoping to make this a monthly series on the 5th of every month, exploring different games and what I have learned from them. And what, the devs were going for. Did they achieve it? Did they learn something? And we'll see that evolve as we cover Dark Souls 2, 3, Elden Ring, and plenty of other FromSoft titles. So one more time, thank you very much for being here. Please, if you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe, the YouTube stuff. And as the darkness finally takes us, I bid you one last farewell.